Good morning, everyone. I'm Fenwick Huss, Dean of the Zicklin School of Business, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to this webinar entitled Zicklin Talks Business. Joining me today from the Dean's office is Associate Dean Gwen Webb, who will moderate our question and answer period. We have a very interesting discussion today around Facebook. Leading the discussion is Yafit Lev-Aretz, a member of our Department of Law faculty, and joining her is Larry Zicklin, former Chairman Neuberger Berman, an alum, our benefactor, and I'm also pleased to say an instructor in our honors program. Larry?
Thank you very much, Fenwick, and welcome everybody. A pleasure to be here. And welcome to Yafit. So let me start with the obvious at the beginning. Yafit, why don't you give our audience an idea of your background and perhaps why you got interested in the social media?
So I'm a law professor and a lawyer by training, but at some point when I was working on my PhD dissertation, I started noticing that there are a lot of questions around our use of the digital world and cyber worlds that really extend beyond our current understanding in terms of, social and technical and ethical and moral and legal questions. And this is when I started kind of venturing into this world of tech policy, understanding how not only social media platforms, but generally platforms that we interact with online, and Internet of Things and so forth, artificial intelligence, all of these technologies, how they influence our society at large, and how our laws, which are always catching up, should treat them in the meantime, and how we should treat them in the meantime. So that's kind of my background. I teach at the law department. And hello to my students if you guys are here. And we always, even in Law 1101 classes, we always discuss things from a technical perspective, trying to understand how laws that have been on the books for many, many years apply to new technologies. And I think this is kind of the gist of the conversation that we're going to have here today.
Well, since we're going to talk about Facebook, and I know it's changed its name to Meta. I don't know if you saw the headline in the New York Times, and they wrote, "Is Meta better?" which I thought was kind of cute. So we're here to talk about Facebook. How big is Facebook?
It's very big. It's very big. I think today we're looking at, how much is it? Like 93 companies that Facebook owns, ranging from, Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp. I used to ask people about Facebook, and especially young people would be like, "Oh, no, we're not on Facebook. It's for old people." And then you ask them, "Okay, but are you on Instagram?" And then they're like, "Oh yeah, we love Instagram." And even those who don't love Instagram, "Are you on WhatsApp?" And yes, of course, we love WhatsApp. So Facebook is huge. I think we know about those companies that I mentioned, but there are many, many, many more that Facebook has acquired over the years.
And I read that Facebook now has almost 3 billion monthly active users.
Yes.
As of the third quarter. They have daily active users of like 1.9 billion. I mean, there's never been an institution in the world that reached 3 billion monthly, 1.9 billion daily. These are unheard of numbers.
100%. You're absolutely right. And if you all think about it, every time someone joins Facebook, they have to click "I agree" to the terms of service, which makes Facebook in a way to one of the biggest legislators in the world, because every time they change the terms of service, they change basically the law that governs the relationship with all of those billion users around the world.
We're going to get to that in a minute. So we've got rough numbers. Almost a quarter of the world's population tuning in to Facebook. And I suspect the statistics mean Facebook and perhaps not the others, not Twitter, not Instagram, etc. Facebook. How does Facebook make its money?
Facebook makes its money mainly through advertising, in the sense that every time users spend time on the platform, Facebook shows them advertisement that is specifically targeted at them based on their demographics and other types of information that is collected and categorized in order for Facebook to target the advertising at them.
And do they have the ability to do more granular advertising than other people? Can you talk about that for a second?
Sure. I mean, let's think about it, Larry. I have a Facebook account, and when I spend time on Facebook, even if I don't post anything, and most people post on Facebook, they will post on their status, or they will post pictures, or they will post comments on other people's comments or posts. But even if you don't do any of that, even if you're 100% passive, you consume information. And when you do that, there is a lot of information that you generate about yourself, about your habits, about your interests. And all of this information is collected through the algorithm that Facebook uses, and basically puts you in a very, very specific and granular box that is you. And I want to say with Facebook's understanding, but I just want to clarify so everybody will understand that it's not Facebook's understanding, it's the algorithm's understanding, right? They're able to target very, very accurately ads to you. Now, at the time, there was a way, I think there is still a way to do that you can go on Facebook and see what kind of categories they use, but they also say that they don't disclose all the categories that they have on their users. But I once did it, and it wasn't 100% accurate, but it was very, very interesting and impressive to see the amount of information they had about me. We know also, even from, aside from what Facebook disclosed on the platform itself to its users, because as I said, you can go and see what kind of information they collected about you and what kind of categories they put you in. But aside from that, there are additional sources of information, such as, for example, patents that Facebook files. Right. So there was a patent about determining users' socioeconomic status, so they can know what types of ads to target at people. For example, they were able to tell whether you have more than one cell phone, or how many rooms you have in your apartment. Do you live with your parents? Do you own your house? And so forth. This type of information, they actually registered a patent about this.
How do they get that kind of information as to how many rooms I have in my apartment, or do I live with my parents?
So that's a great question. Some of the information is from inferences, meaning you give away some information, and they are able, based on information they collected about other people, to infer that, for example, if you live in this and this address, and if you are in close proximity with other Facebook users in this address for that and that amount of time, you're probably living together. So they're able to kind of combine this information with the information that is publicly available about your town or whatever. But there are also additional tools that Facebook is now developing that will give them more insights into that. For example, AI tools, virtual reality games that they offer. They have their own cameras that they sell, and all this information is collected and kind of merged together into the building of one comprehensive profile of each and every Facebook user.
And do they agglomerate all the information they get from any number of these 93 companies they own and put it together in one central file, so they're accumulating information from all these different places?
So I don't want to say that the answer is yes, because I haven't checked it as for each and every one of the 93 companies, but for a fact, they do that with most of the companies. And when, for example, WhatsApp was acquired by Facebook, there was the big debate about whether information should be shared between WhatsApp and Facebook. And in fact, until a few years ago, it was not. And then they decided that they will share it. And there was a huge story about WhatsApp founder actually walking away from millions of dollars of bonus just because he just disagreed with this move. And he promised that WhatsApp will never have this kind of monetization model. And now, against his own vision, Facebook decided to do that. So for sure, they do share information with, I assume, most of their companies, but I cannot testify to all of them.
Okay, so Facebook makes its money through advertising because the service is a free service.
Yeah.
So I'm trading, if I use Facebook, I'm trading a free service for lots of information that I provide to Facebook to manipulate any way it wants to manipulate it and sell it in any way it can sell it.
So that's Facebook's argument, right?
That's Facebook's.
Yeah, Facebook says, we're giving you an awesome service. You guys can now, connect to people all around the world. You can maintain your loose social ties, which in the past you had to do, spending much more time and effort in doing that. So we're giving you this really fun tool, and we're giving it to you for free. But it's not really for free. What you're giving away is exactly everything you listed. And the question is, to what extent, we should allow individuals to agree to this kind of trade-off, and whether individuals should really agree, because we can all see that by now the consequences are far-reaching and extending beyond individuals.
Okay, and I want to talk about that. If Facebook makes its money by advertising, my next question is, how can they increase their advertising revenues? Because that's obviously what they want to do. Do they have to create an attractive package that keeps people online more frequently for longer periods of time? Is that what they're doing?
Yes, so I think it's a combination of two things that we see here. First, engagement. You want to optimize for maximum engagement. You want to keep people on the platform for as long as possible, because the more they scroll down, the more ads you're going to be able to show them. But I think the other thing is you want to be able to offer, the most groundbreaking advertising products in the market. And, that brings us to not only, if you think about advertising way back, it was contextual. So for example, if you went to to the mall, they would probably advertise for the stores in the mall because you're there already. And if you go to, to a website that deals with parenthood, so you're going to see advertising for baby products or things like that. So it's going to be more contextual to the context at which you are at that very moment. But what we see over time is that we see behavioral advertising. So it's no longer about the environment or the context, it's about the individual and about their own behavior. So I think what Facebook is doing to basically maintain its power is, one, make sure that users stay on the platform for as long as possible, but two, also improve their targeting techniques and the ability to provide very, very granular profiles of their users over time. So the advertising will be more effective, arguably.
My grandchildren who talk to me about this tell me that being on Facebook is like going down the rabbit hole, that there's never an end. There's story after story, and one's connected to the other. And before you know it, you're spending extraordinary amounts of time on Facebook. And the statistic I saw is, on average, people who use it spend almost 2.5 hours a day on Facebook.
Right. I mean, it depends on the age of the user, but between the ages of 16 and 24, we see the average at around 3 hours a day, which is a lot. And it is exactly that. It's the addictive product mechanism and the fact that you want to keep scrolling down. You want to stay there, and you want to stay there. And it's almost like you need, an active intervention to stop, because it is designed to be addictive and to keep you there for as long as possible. And the feed is endless.
And did the pandemic affect this usage?
Yes. Especially for children and young users, we saw the time almost doubled. But I mean, that's a part of a bigger increase in screen time for children and young and teenagers.
By the way, you use the word children. Are any children allowed to use Facebook, or are there age limits?
That's a great question. So because of a specific privacy law that we have in the United States, that's called the Children Online Privacy Protection Act. In short, we call it COPPA. Because we have COPPA, and COPPA provides specific protections for children under the age of 18, Facebook formally does not cater to children under the age of 13. Okay. But I can tell you, even from my own experience, seeing children of friends and relatives, they do use the platform because Facebook does not do much to make sure that users under the age of 13 are not there. And because Facebook's product is not targeted at children, right? It's not a Disney website. It's not a Nickelodeon app. It is not targeted specifically at children. And because of that, they don't have a lot of liability around, whether they checked or didn't check that children have been using their platform. But even aside from that, I just want to mention here that this line between 13 and 13 and a day is really artificial. And I'm not sure to what extent, a 13 and a half or a 14 or even a 15-year-old deserve less protection when it comes to social media.
And there are charges that I've read that Facebook, in maximizing its own algorithms, is prioritizing profits over public safety. Do you believe that?
I do believe that.
And do you think the recent evidence and whistleblower testimony by, I think it's Frances Haugen, demonstrates that to be true?
Yes. I mean, I don't know if we can, we always look for like a really, black or white narrative when it comes to this kind of situation. So we really all want to think about Facebook as the villain who now tries to destroy the world through maximizing profit over public safety. I'm not sure there is this kind of narrative going around here, but I do believe that at the end of the day, the New York Times says that Mark Zuckerberg used to end every meeting in Facebook with with his fist in the air saying company over country. So, maybe it's just a way of motivating people and thinking about the company as the most important thing in the world and maximizing profits and giving people goals. But at the end of the day, yes, I don't think it's part of a grand scheme to prioritize money over public safety. But I do think that when it came to actual decision making, Facebook failed dramatically and did prioritize profits over public safety.
Well, just based on the conversation we've just had, Yafit, it seems that Facebook is addictive. I mean, I don't know of any other thing where people are on for 2.5 hours a day or kids are on for 3 hours a day. So it's addictive. It seems to be young people that use it most of all. So aren't we selling an addictive product to a young person?
Yes, we are. And it's not just an addictive product. I mean, one of the things that the Facebook Files series from the Wall Street Journal and Frances Haugen's testimony show is that it's not just addictive, it's harmful in other senses. For example, on Instagram, the platform has become dramatically problematic for teenagers, right? Amplifying risk for mental health. And a lot of teens feel bad about themselves after spending time on Instagram. Kids saying, I'm really unhappy, but I can't stop. And I mean, in the research by Facebook, there was a sentence that was, it is really stuck with me, which is, we make body image worse for 1 in 3 teen girls. It goes beyond everything.
So say that again. We make body image
worse for 1 in 3 teen girls. This is a huge number of girls who are walking around feeling bad about themselves because of the way this product is designed.
I've read somewhere that some of these feelings about body image have led to suicidal thoughts.
Yes.
That plus fashion magazines seem to be very harmful to young girls in particular. And since I have 4 granddaughters, I'm sensitive to this.
Yeah, but I do want to draw a distinction between fashion magazines. Okay, I grew up in the 90s, and when I was a teenage girl, everybody was talking about how fashion magazines are harmful and how they create a false body image for young teens. But the problem is that, with fashion magazines, they are different from Instagram in two main senses, right? The first is the addictive product mechanism. Fashion magazines end. Instagram doesn't. You can scroll down forever. And the second one is, again, Instagram is optimized for engagement. It wants to keep you on the platform because, and that's the second part of the problem, it wants to target you with relevant advertisement. And because of that, there is another concern about a rabbit hole, the one that you described earlier, that you, for example, and there were studies showing that teenage girls would go on the platform looking for healthy recipes and would very, very quickly find themselves in an anorexia related content rabbit hole. So that's another problem. And this is why we hear that social networks, and especially Facebook and Instagram, create this kind of polarization, because if you want to attract people, you have to provide this kind of sensational content for them to stay. And this is how you just gradually move more and more and more towards the extreme, to help people feel more engaged and more interested. So I think this is a bit different from fashion magazines, because fashion magazines, like I would read one, I'll throw it away, and then that's the end of it. But on Instagram, and again, I'm even talking about myself, I love Instagram. I can spend hours on Instagram. It's really, really fun, and you don't want to stop. And then you get not only advertisement that is targeted at you and has many, many problems that we can talk about, but also content that the algorithm, again, in a hope to keep you on the platform, creates a specific feed for you that will keep you there, dragging you more and more and more into the extreme zone, into a really dark rabbit hole in many cases.
In a way, Facebook, Instagram has to do that to keep you involved. Because I'm assuming the more minutes you're on there, the more advertising they can sell, the more advertising they can sell, the more money they can make. So I would assume these stories have to be more and more sensational to keep you in that rabbit hole.
Yeah, and I mean, that's, again, another part of the problem of the whole fake news issue. If you think about it, how did fake news start? It started because when people see sensational content, they want to hear more. Even if they want to hear more just to rule it out, but they want to hear more. And this is how fake news started, with a teenager from Estonia who found that if he's going to establish a website with really sensational news, regardless of whether they are real, and they weren't, he will be able to just have so many people looking at his news stories, and he'll be able to sell advertisement and become a millionaire in no time, which really happened. So that's exactly the problem with this model. The model by itself is not bad. The problem is that it drives the platforms to drive users into the extreme.
Well, I remember a number of years ago, I can't remember how long ago it was, maybe it was in the 2016 election, around that time, when they talked about Pizzagate, and they talked about human trafficking in this pizza store in Washington, and young girls were being seduced. It was all mysterious and sensational. Not true, of course, but people believed it.
Yeah. I remember having a conversation with someone about the Pope endorsing, at the time he was candidate, Trump. He did not endorse him, but the story was on Facebook and it was trending, and it became part of Facebook's trending news section. And that's the point where Facebook started realizing, and all of us started realizing, that we have a real problem of fake news. And this problem was 100% created by the business model of optimizing for maximum engagement.
Do kids get addicted very early, do you think?
My impression is that they do. I'm not a psychologist or a social scientist, but again, from studies that I read and my even personal impression as a mom, yes, they find it very, very interesting. They don't spend time on Facebook. They have other platforms today that are more interesting to them. TikTok, for example, very, very young users. But yes, they have to fight the addictive mechanism from a very, very young age. And most of them are unable to do that.
Can young parents with young children successfully fight this off?
Again, this is not a scientific answer, but my own impression is that no, most parents are really, really helpless. And when the Facebook files were published, one of the things that people said is we actually feel better knowing that this was happening, because now we understand that it's not our fault. This is how the product is designed. And if we want to fight it, we are now in a position of fighting Facebook and Instagram. We, the small parents at home.
I'm glad I'm not a parent today. I think it would be very difficult. I'm also interested in the fact that most advertisers, take the news programs on television, they don't know you individually. They cater to a broad spectrum of audience members. But social media knows you through an algorithm in such a granular way, then they can probably know your own personal weaknesses and cater to those weaknesses. Is
Yes.
that unfair?
Is that unfair? I mean, that's a power that they have. The question is how they're using it, right? But this is my biggest concern with social media today. I think that we can find ways to fight the addictive mechanism. I think we can find ways to alleviate some of the fake news issues and radicalization problem and amplification of content that should not be amplified. I think all of those problems are solvable. What I'm really concerned about is the fact that Facebook knows me and everybody so damn well that they're able to target the weaknesses that we all have in a very effective way without us knowing about it. And in fact, there are numerous examples, but I'm just going to give you one. Facebook Australia, back in 2017, there was a leak. And one of the PowerPoints was leaked, and it showed a PowerPoint that they showed potential advertisers. And in the PowerPoint, they said that they are able to target teenagers, and they are able to say with pretty high level of accuracy what mood they're at. Are they happy? Are they sad? Are they frustrated? And based on that mood, to target advertising at them. And I remember when I first read that, I was in complete shock, because I was concerned about that. I also wrote about that. I called it personalized choice architecture, because it's not like choice architecture hasn't been around, right? I mean, when you walk into a supermarket, the pastries are always on the far end of the store, because they want to lure you in. They want you to walk all the way into the store. And when you are standing to pay, the candies are always at the eye level of children, because they count on it that your kid is gonna hand you that chocolate and ask you to buy it. But I'm okay with that, because I feel like this kind of targets, that's a fair game, right? It targets human weaknesses. All of us, we're all in the same boat, and we're kind of playing the same game with the same tools. But here we're not, because they're not targeting human weaknesses anymore. They're targeting my own weaknesses. And if they know that I'm very, very sensitive about my weight, they're going to target me based on that. And they're going to be very effective, because I am, or I'm not. Okay. So that's my point. I think that's one of my biggest concerns about Facebook.
Does Facebook treat everybody around the world in the same way? Or is it different in some countries than others? Is it worse in some countries than others?
It is. Actually, the version of Facebook that we see in the United States is kind of the best version out there. So all of the complaints that we have in this conversation and in others are really just the tip of the iceberg, because when it comes to developing countries, for example, Facebook not only offers the service, it also offers the internet connection. And through the internet connection, you're only able, the internet connection that Facebook provides, the infrastructure, you're only able to access a number of specific apps. So you're also limited in the amount of information and the type of information that you are able to consume. So by all means, and the fact that, you know, the US is English speaking, and you have many people who can moderate this content and go over it and filter it for Facebook's users is very different from other countries where Facebook was not able to effectively create this team of content moderators. And we saw terrible stories around the world about how Facebook was used to for really terrible purposes.
So we look at this conversation we're having and we say, in many ways, not in all ways, because Facebook can do a lot of good in terms of connecting people, but they can do a lot of harm. They have a product that's addictive. They have a product that lends itself to young people becoming addicted. We wouldn't permit this with tobacco products. We regulate it in some way. Can Facebook be regulated?
I believe it can. I definitely believe it can. There is also kind of a move right now to, you know, even before we move to talk about regulation, to target Mark Zuckerberg and Sheryl Sandberg, who is the CEO and COO of Facebook, to target them personally, because there is some sense that they feel like they can get away with anything by paying good lawyers and having the company as kind of the shield. But, you know, this is the first time that we hear lawmakers and regulators not only talking, but actually involving C-suite executives in liability. So the Attorney General at Washington, D.C. filed a motion to add Mark Zuckerberg as a defendant to a 2018 lawsuit that they filed stemming from the Cambridge Analytica scandal. And
can you just talk about what that scandal was, in case our audience knows?
Sure. So, I mean, we talked about how Facebook is able to target users in a granular way. And in 2018, there was this company called Cambridge Analytica. It was a political campaign company. And what Cambridge Analytica promised, it was to use information from Facebook to create very granular profiles of users and to target political advertising at them based on those profiles that they created. So everything I talked about in terms of personalized choice architecture, just imagine that in the election context, okay? And Facebook, there was a whole story about how Cambridge Analytica gained access to the Facebook data. And there was consent from 250,000 users to take part in this information collection scheme at that time. The problem is with Facebook is that if you are a user of Facebook and you gave consent for the collection of your information, you also consented to the collection of information from all of your friends. So this 250,000 number grew into 87 million, okay, of users who were involved.
They were concentric circles. It just went from circle to circle to circle.
Exactly. So that was the Cambridge Analytica story. And it was, I mean, there was a whistleblower there as well. And he just blew the whistle and said, listen, this is our democracy. We cannot allow this to happen. Cambridge Analytica, Facebook kind of threw them under the bus very quickly, and Cambridge Analytica went out of business the following year. But Facebook was able to kind of get away with it. There is still a lawsuit that is still in court, so we don't have any results yet. But I can't say that there was any significant harm to Facebook from Cambridge Analytica, except for perhaps the reputational harm, because I think that was the first time people started understanding that we're looking at a very, very powerful and very dangerous potentially player in the, in the commercial landscape. So that's the Cambridge Analytica. And what I said is that the Attorney General at Washington, D.C. filed a motion to add Mark Zuckerberg as a defendant to a 2018 lawsuit that was stemming from the Cambridge Analytica scandal. And that's very, very unusual. We usually do not add, executives to this kind of lawsuits. But the problem is that there is a growing feeling that specifically at Facebook, specifically Mark Zuckerberg, specifically Sheryl Sandberg, people feel like they can just pay their way out of everything, and people want accountability, and we start seeing this conversation gaining more and more traction.
But that is assuming that if Mark Zuckerberg wanted, he could self-regulate, that Facebook could regulate itself. Do I want Facebook regulating itself? Nobody elected them.
And that's the $1 million question, right? We hear a lot about this in the context of content moderation. Like, do I want Facebook to be the arbitrator of free speech? Do I want Facebook to decide what kind of content I see and don't see? So before we start this conversation, I just want to put it, to say it very clearly. Facebook is the arbitrator of speech right now.
At the moment, I agree.
But also not only because they have content moderation and community guidelines, but also because they have an algorithm that has to decide which content I'm going to see, me or everybody else, we're going to see first. And, it's just like on Google, the first pages of search results is usually what people look at. They don't move past it. They don't move past the third page. It's very, very rare that people move past the third page of search results. So I think that's a great question. There is a bipartisan support to doing something about it. The problem is that no one really knows what to do about it. We have Section 230 of the CDA, the Communication Decency Act, that offers basically immunity to platforms like Facebook. And this is why, regardless of the amount of fake news and everything that we see on Facebook and hate speech and everything, there is no liability. And there is across the board support to changing CDA 230. The problem is that no one really knows how to change it. Even people who were really the greatest opponents of CDA 230 and have some bills right now to change it. The changes proposed are very narrow, because at the end of the day, moderating content is a job it's a task that has to be done almost manually and every day. And things are changing so rapidly that you can't really prescribe any law, with high level standards that is not going to have to use like actual guidelines on the ground on the day-to-day operation. So that's a great question. The answer is yes, we don't want them to be the arbitrators of speech. At the same time, you see regulators kind of stuck and don't know how to move forward and what kind of rules we want to formulate to make sure that they are not the arbitrators of speech, but they still kind of do the job on the ground.
But this morning, there was a story on the news where a congressman took a cartoon, manipulated a cartoon, put it on Instagram for sure, maybe Twitter, I can't remember. But it shows that congressman killing another congressman and attacking Joe Biden, President of the United States. And Instagram left it up, Facebook left it up. And the argument was that if this were an individual doing it, we would have taken it down. But since it's a person in political power, we think the public has a right to know, to see this. But it actually shows this congressman attacking another congressman, or in this case, a congresswoman.
Right. I mean, but again, at the end of the day, it's even a standard that is, echoed in our laws, that when you are a public figure, you kind of enjoy a higher level of speech, right? Of freedom of speech. So it's not unreasonable to make this kind of argument. I'm not saying that I support it or not. I'm just saying that it's not unreasonable. But at the end of the day, do we want Facebook to decide? And most of us will say no, but then, okay, so who should decide? Our regulators, how are they going to decide? Are we going to have like a team from the FTC just, scanning the internet 24/7 and deciding which is?
It would take 50,000 people to do that.
Not even more than that. And also, do we want the government to do that? So the internet was rallied as a space that is for freedom of expression, for everybody to express themselves. And suddenly you have this really huge questions about what should be left out and what shouldn't. And today it's Facebook. Maybe tomorrow we're going to have another platform that is going to be very dominant and people are going to use it. So are you going to just shift responsibilities? I think those are really, really tough questions. I think people who accuse Facebook of not doing enough in terms of content moderation kind of ignore the bigger question of whose responsibility is it, and how this responsibility should be operationalized on the ground. And I think those two questions are really huge questions. I can say that I myself, even as a researcher who's been looking and studying these issues for years now, have easy answers.
Doesn't Senator Klobuchar, isn't she trying to address this issue?
Yeah, but even she, right? She has a bill right now for vaccine misinformation. So with vaccine misinformation, in this point of time, it makes very good sense to have a bill that addresses this kind of misinformation and what's going to happen if you, as a platform, amplify vaccine misinformation. But it doesn't move much forward, in terms of what about other types of misinformation? How do you define misinformation? What do you want the platform to do? Okay, so they will not amplify it. Should they stop, actively prevent the sharing of this kind of information? So I think the line drawing task here is really, really complicated. And I'm not saying Facebook is innocent, far from that. All I'm saying is that our regulators also have a lot of questions to deal with that they kind of push away to those platforms in a way that I find not entirely fair.
If Facebook were as humane as could be and had all goodwill that they could have, could they regulate their own content? I mean, when you have 3 billion users a month, I don't know how many times each one posts or listens or God knows what. There's got to be gazillion numbers of things going on.
I think if you prioritize public safety over profits, yes, they can do that. The question is it fair? Is it fair to demand that they'll do it? And if we demand them to do it, shouldn't we demand YouTube, Snapchat, TikTok, all other social networks or social media platforms to do the same? And if you do it, is it smart to kill this market, because that's what it's going to do? And then what will be the alternative? There is also an international angle to it, right? I mean, Facebook is a US company. When you have users leaving Facebook, you have other countries where you have platforms that are not subject to the same rules. And do you want to find all of your US users on those platforms? Like, I think there are a lot of tough questions here. It's very easy to portray Facebook as the villain. And again, not saying they're innocent, but I'm just saying this story is far more complicated than people tend to portray it.
Yafit, I have a Zoom call I do with a bunch of friends every week, and we talk about certain issues. And one of the things I often say to them is, if you had all the power, what would you do about this particular thing? And I'm thinking to myself, in the case of Facebook, if I had all the power, I wouldn't have a clue what to do about what's going on Facebook. I look at January 6th, and I'm assuming that January 6th had a lot to do with Facebook. I don't know the degree to which it was created by Facebook, but what am I supposed to do about it?
I think that's a fair question. And of course, I don't have the answers. To me, both as, someone who lives in our society, but also as a researcher who thinks about these questions quite a lot, the answer is baby steps. There are some steps that we can take on the regulatory front, especially in the context of privacy laws and in the context of competition policy. I think we should start with this, this kind of baby steps, and then move to target bigger questions and bigger picture concerns. Because at this point, I don't think anyone has kind of a holistic answer to how we deal with this problem. And even if someone has this question, the nature of technology and the evolving technologies that we see out there is that whatever answer you have today, by the time you implement it, you're going to have so many new challenges that you did not see coming, that maybe your solution is going to end up just complicating stuff and making things worse instead of improving them.
Meanwhile, Facebook is getting more powerful, having more users. I would argue they are certainly, I shouldn't say certainly, they are more powerful than governments, because governments can't mass the numbers of people Facebook can mass. January 6th being an example. I would think if that happened today, it could be worse than January 6th. Here,
yes, and yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Here, this thing I told you about this morning with the congressman and the other congressman, what if he actually incited somebody to kill her? And somebody killed her and said, I read it on Facebook, I saw what this congressman said, I agreed with him, and so I knifed her.
I couldn't agree more. Facebook is more powerful. And by the way, it's not just Facebook, it's Facebook, Google, Amazon, all of those technologies are by far more powerful than our governments. As I told you at the beginning of this conversation, every time each and every one of us click, I agree, we agree to a contract. This contract is legal terms that we're bound by, just like any other law, but we just agreed to be bound by those terms. And the amount of people that is bound by Facebook's terms of service, it's the biggest government in the world. Think about it.
The
right?
biggest government in the world.
Yep.
Oh, I'm going to leave this conversation depressed. Gwen.
I thank you both. There are quite a few questions here. Can you talk about something? Can you talk about how Facebook sets advertising rates?
Wow, that's a great question. I cannot talk about that. I believe this information is to some extent public if you go and try to buy advertisement space on Facebook, but I really have no idea about the actual pricing model. That's a great question.
Why wouldn't it be based on the number of users at that particular moment in time?
It's probably based on click rates and number of views, but to what extent they offer different level of granularity in terms of targeting the users and what kind of products they have. I do know that they have like tiers of targeting. So I really don't know to speak to the numbers, but it's something that if anyone in the audience is really interested in, and researchers do that all the time, they just go and pretend to be an advertiser and buy ads on Facebook. And this is how, by the way, many of the concerns around discrimination and around hate speech and so forth has been discovered just by this kind of exercise. Go and buy an ad on Facebook. So sorry, I can't speak to that, but.
It's interesting what you say, because I'm thinking of your prior remark that this is the most powerful government in the world. And we actually know very little about the most powerful government in the world.
Yes, we know very little about it, and it's actually protected by law because many of their products, like their algorithm, is protected by trade secret. Trade secrecy law protect all this information. We cannot know a lot about it. It's private information that Facebook owns.
A related question deals with the advertisers themselves. And one of the questions is, and I don't think you can give a straightforward answer to the question, is how do advertisers measure the effectiveness of exposure they get on Facebook? But I mean, it must be worth it to them.
Yes. Again, this is not, I invite Larry to see if any of my colleagues in the business school can testify to that or discuss that, because I'm not a marketing professor, or I have no knowledge about how they measure that. I suspect that it's just like in any other industry in terms of click rates and number of views. They do have some, advanced tools, for example, to check for how long you hover over an ad or a post. Sometimes they will be able, not sometimes, they always are able to see if you type something or if you were about to share it with someone, even if you regret it later and you didn't send this or didn't share this information, it is saved and used as part of your targeting. So I don't know to explain how they measure the success of the advertising. And by the way, this is one of the criticism in the academic world, that everybody looks at behavioral advertising as such an amazing tool with amazing conversion rates, but in reality, it's not like we know for a fact that people are actually, are affected more or convert more or click more through when the advertisement is behavioral as opposed to contextual.
There are a lot of questions here, but actually some of them are getting into the idea that you said it's very difficult for regulators to figure out what to do. And you said they can take baby steps. But are there pressures that advertisers can exert? And are there pressures that society can exert on how Facebook operates that might help alleviate some of these problems?
Yeah, so I mean, market pressure is always a good thing, right? So we already see advertisers that withdraw from Facebook and call others not to advertise on Facebook. At this point, this movement is very minimal and insignificant, but if we're going to see more and more of that, of course, I suspect that this will. I mean, this is like classic supply and demand. And if you're not supplying what your advertisers are into or interested in, you're not going to get demand. So I think advertisers' pressures is an excellent way for market regulation and for self-regulation. One more thing that is happening is for advertisers to create their own guidelines and ethical codes. And we see that also on Facebook. The problem with that is that they're not binding, right? It's not like actual regulation, like, okay, you have this ethical code of conduct and you don't follow it. It's not like anything is going to happen. People are going to look at you weird, but at the end of the day, you're still making money.
All right, Yafit, this is a question for you. What advice do you have for Baruch students about their presence on Facebook, not just their use, but their presence on Facebook as they approach graduation and are entering the job market as new grads?
Wow, Professor Webb, actually, I think that Baruch's students can give me better advice about online presence than the advice that I can give them. You guys are all familiar with your Insta and Finsta, right? And for the old souls in the crowd, Finsta is the fake Instagram that you have where you show that you're such a good student and you don't party at all and you just study all day and you babysit little kids and help old people and volunteer. And Instagram is like your actual real Instagram profile that you share only with your very close group of friends. So I believe you guys actually by now, as opposed to people 10 years ago, know the risks of having too much exposure for personal information. I urge you not to share too much. And if you have Insta and Finsta, make sure you keep them separated and make sure that no one who shouldn't get to your Insta actually gets to it. Okay. And I just want you to be mindful because many of those concerns that we talk about today might be the standards for tomorrow. And maybe for our kids, it's going to be very, very natural to share this information, to have those social networks, to spend 3-4 hours on those platforms. But for us, because we're in a world that is ever changing, we have to ask ourselves those questions and to deal with them. So all I'm asking you really is, be aware. You want to know what's out there. You want to know for a fact that when you apply to graduate schools, admission officers look at your profiles. Your social media is part of your application. Okay, so make sure it's polished, make sure it looks good. Always, always, always make sure that you're on top of your privacy preferences. Go check them. Make sure that you know who you share the information with. If you want to have a perfectly private profile, you can do that. Make sure you do that. If you want to share your profile with the world because you're magnificent and you're doing amazing things, make sure you do that. Okay, so that's my advice to you all. I think, as I said, that you can actually teach me. And I invite all of you to reach out to me. You have my information on the Baruch website. But again, just make sure you understand today's world, make sure you understand the tools that are out there, and make sure that you understand how admission officers or your prospect employer, your future employer, all check them all the time and learn about you and how your digital profile, digital resume is being perceived by others.
I just want to ask Yafit one question. In today's world, is there such a thing as privacy?
Is there such a thing as privacy? So
I mean, every time I touch, I agree. God knows what happens with that information.
Right. The answer is, it depends, of course, how you define privacy. My answer is that yes, to many people, there is still privacy. But in terms of, if you're going to ask me whether our information is protected, if you're going to ask me whether our information is never misused, the answer is no to both. So if this is how you define privacy, so no, we're past that.
I'm sorry, Gwen.
No, it's fine. Do you have a Facebook account yourself?
I do. I do have a Facebook account, and I don't want to discourage anyone here from having a Facebook account. I have a Facebook account. I have an Instagram account. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on Snapchat. I'm really on TikTok, like any social network you can think of. But I have the privilege of saying that I'm doing it for work. You guys don't. So just make sure that you do it, in a smart way. Make sure that you don't share information with people that you don't want to share information with. And also just keep in mind that everything that you do is being tracked and, as we say, could and would be used against you.
Well, we are close to the hour. It's too bad we can't go on much longer. But thank you both. I want to mention quickly that our next webinar will be on December 14th on crypto assets and currencies. Joining Larry will be Charles Swang. He is managing partner of Lightning Capital and an adjunct teacher of cryptocurrencies, crypto assets here at Baruch, and our own law professor, Nizam Pakin. Again, thank you, Larry. Thank you, Yafit, for a really, really compelling discussion of Facebook.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Yafit.
Thanks for having me. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Have a great day.